Madagascar is not just a famous movie about Alex the Lion, but it is an island nation, the fourth largest island in the world. This island nation, which is one of the biggest, has just gone through a revolution and coup that a few months ago overthrew the government and replaced it with military rule. The government of Madagascar now sits under military rule, and what happens next has a lot of history to understand. And the history that we will study today will help us understand this nation and what's happening here. So what we're going to do today is go through the history of what led us to this in Madagascar and figure out why it is that Madagascar is in the state that it's in. For those that don't know, my name is Reese, and I cover history and geopolitics around the world. Today we're talking about Madagascar, both the history of what led to here and the actual events happening in the last few months in Madagascar today. With that, we're going to talk about some past history, and I'd like to reference the fact that I have covered this before. Now, the history of Madagascar leading up to this moment is different in many ways, but is a vector pathway that has led us to where we are today. I covered the entire history of Madagascar in a survey type of system in my podcast, Young History, only a few years back, and it is still very relevant today. So if you want to know even more backdrop as to what is happening in Madagascar, check that out, and then let's dive into the history here of what is happening in Madagascar today. Madagascar is a beautiful nation, filled with beaches, deep cultural history, a language that has spread far beyond its borders, and the best vanilla in the entire world. But at the same time, it is one of the poorest nations in the entire world. At this point, about 75% of people living in Madagascar are at or below the poverty line. And a big issue that led to this is the issue with electricity and power. At this point, 40% or less of the family homes in Madagascar have access to power. So that means over 60% are lacking power on any given day. On top of this, there has been a continuation of blackouts. Random blackouts will happen for hours to days at a time, restricting people's access to technology they need, and for many, water. Because of the fact that electricity and blackouts are things that are not, electricity is rare and blackouts are common, it makes it hard for people to get access to water. It's hard for people to order things they need to be able to leave the house, to be able to leave their young in order to get water, the most important need that any human can have. A lot of this is being pointed at the government. People are very frustrated with the government and say that it is not providing stability, it's not solving problems, it's not focusing the taxes and the actual ideas of the government on helping the people of Madagascar. Fingers on top of this are started being pointed. These fingers are being pointed at Jayama. It is the state-provided electricity company, which now faces a lot of accusations for embezzlement, misallocation of funds, and underserving communities across Madagascar because of the fact that blackouts and the lack of electricity is so common. Madagascar is a nation that is divided in two, the haves and the have-nots. One part of the nation is fine. They enjoy the beautiful beaches. They enjoy the spoils of the vanilla industry. They enjoy what Madagascar provides in the best way. But the other half, or the other majority, I should say, doesn't have this luxury. They struggle every day to make ends meet. They struggle every day to get the needs they need to literally get by each day. Resentment is growing heavily over this. There's fuel being added to the fire of the Malagasy people, and it's not going away. It goes so deep into everything, but it all roots back to the lack of water and the lack of power. Children are struggling to grow and digest things well and become young adults because of the fact that there is hard access to water. There's not easy access for people to get from A to B and to get the things they need. The lack of consistency of access to electricity and the consistency of electric blackouts have made it hard for many aspects of daily life to occur. It's hard for people to cook because of electricity not working, stoves turning off, microwaves turning off, ovens not being attached. It's made it hard for children to come home and study after school. Grades are dropping. It's hard for people to pass their classes because when they go home and they are not in a safe environment to study. Anybody who works online or pretty much any indoor job at all heavily struggles to get their work done, to stay employed because they don't have access to electricity that allows them to do their work. All of this is piling on the Malagasy people, and now the government is hearing about it. Because of the rise of this issue and the claim from people that this is changing their lives negatively, two state politicians, Fanary Rao Koto Arasoa and Clements Raharina, have organized protests in the capital city to try and challenge this. As soon as word spread of this, the government cracked down. They cracked down hard on the protests that were happening and arrested the politicians involved. This rubbed the Malagasy people the wrong way. They felt that this was the government showing that they were willing to suppress the opposition, which is a challenge to civil liberties. Many groups that stood up for civil liberties that were previously established in Madagascar started to rise up and challenge the government. At the same time, the youth started an online platform and a movement that started to grow and grow. It is now known as Gen Z MADA, which is the Generation Z movement for Madagascar. The arrests and violent end to the protest that oppressed the opposition, which I mentioned before, happened on September 19th. Just over the next week, things got more intent-based. The Madagascar movement started to gain a lot of traction. Not only did it use its social media platforms to actually organize protests and get things from paper and, I guess I should say, phone to actual activity, but TikTok actually helped get so much movement behind this movement that a committee was formed. This committee included civil rights and civil social unit members. It got local politicians, capital city officials, all to get under this community and join a part of an actual committee, to form an actual committee to make decisions for the overall Madagascar movement. Another big thing that happened was the TikTok movement that came with this got so much traction that it actually got the verbal approval and verbal kind of pledge of allegiance from a federal politician, and that federal politician was the opposition leader and former president. All the politicians I've mentioned refused to be a part of, at the time, the president's cabinet. That president was Andry Rajoelina. All the politicians, the opposition leader, the former president, the two politicians that helped organize the initial protest, all of them refused to be a part of Andry Rajoelina's government. And all this culminated into massive protests on September 25th. On this day, the internet connection and social media was used to get people out across the country. Nationwide, there were protests, and the biggest contribution came from Gen Z Mada. It had thousands and thousands of people protesting in the streets, but a lot of civil liberties groups contributed not only people, but tools, tents, things for people to use as base of operations for the protests and keep things moving. This protest got a lot of momentum. At first, it started as just kind of a challenge to the issues with power, electricity, and water scarcity, but then it rolled into a greater challenge of corruption in general. The people started to challenge the fact that so much of the government funding was tied up in paying for private companies that weren't doing things right, like Jayama, the power company that was underserving most of the Malagasy people. And then more came out. People started to protest, and more protesters came out in general on the 25th and the days that followed because of the fact that apparently a government official had killed protesters. Government-backed enforcers killed protesters at an earlier assembly, and this just added more fuel to the fire. It added more cause to the movement, and people were really beckoning for change from Andry Rajoelina, but the president refused. There was no capitulation, and there was hardly acknowledgement of all of what was happening. And at the start, the government was somewhat accepting of the protests, but as the news came out that protesters were not only attacked, but some had their lives ended, things got messy both for the protesting side and the government side, and the tensions just continued to rise through September 25th. Instead of acknowledging anything that was happening, President Rajoelina decided to start to make up foreign adversaries and say that protesters were working with foreigners and foreign powers to take him down. This false accusation lit an even brighter fire under the behinds of those protesting for Madagascar and the Malagasy people. The pressure then continued to mount, and people marched into the capital saying, Rajoelina out now. They wanted Rajoelina, the president, out, and they wanted a change to the election committee and the National Assembly. They wanted a complete redraw of the government system so that it could change, in their words, and hopes for the better. What followed this was the pressure really being felt by the government and President Rajoelina actually fleeing the country. He fled not only the capital area, but fled the country itself with the help of the French military. And this is nothing new to Rajoelina because back in 2009, that's actually how he got into power. Back when there was a similar youth protest for similar reasons of government corruption and issues with the way things are being ran, Rajoelina was actually upheld by a military coup that helped him maintain power and hold Madagascar in the place it was moving towards. It is the French military that helps Rajoelina escape and leave his people behind, fleeing what they wanted, fleeing the will of the people. But it is CAPSAT, which is a Malagasy special forces unit for the military that actually steps in. Now, they claim that they were working with the protesters and, that this was done for the Malagasy people, but the regime change that they wanted may not have quite been what they expected. What is now in power and took over at this point was a military government, and CAPSAT was the special forces unit that saw when Rajoelina fled, there was a weakness, but there was also opportunity. They pushed out the rest of the leaders that remained in the capital and remained in Madagascar and staged a coup to take power for themselves. They did all of this behind their leader, Colonel Michael Radrianarina, who then placed himself as the leader of the country, and then just a few weeks later was named the actual president of Madagascar. I'm going to take a brief pause here to shift from finishing up the chronology of how things have happened here in Madagascar to acknowledge one of the consistencies in this protest that has now, both before this and since, become a nationally recognized and internationally recognized thing. This is the flying of a certain pirate flag at protest. It is a black skull and crossbones with a certain straw hat on top, and this is the Jolly Roger of the Straw Hat Pirates, the main characters of the show One Piece. And that flag, the Jolly Roger, represents the hopes and beliefs of the main character, the captain, which is freedom above all else. And that freedom is the best thing a person can have, and the more free you are, the more your life is true. This flag has now been flown in Nepal, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and now in Madagascar to represent a challenge to oppressive governments, a standing up against injustice, and just an overall fight for what people believe is right, for them to be acknowledged, for them to be represented, all of those things. And they're all being pulled from One Piece. The story that is told in that manga and anime has those themes in it. It is a show that very much focuses on standing up to government oppression, standing up to injustice, and doing what is right, no matter where loyalties lie, no matter where someone's from, that the truth of things, the true good, comes from somewhere, and that there is an objective good. And the greatness of that story has now jumped from manga pages and from anime screens straight into the hearts of people, and has started to kind of gain a moniker of its own, where when the Straw Hat flag is flown, the call for freedom follows. But to wrap up things with Madagascar, there's been some statements from the military that is now in power under, Colonel Michael, who's now the president, that they will host real elections in a year and a half to 2 years. But this doesn't quite sit right with the people, and at minimum doesn't make full sense. So many of the people that protested and were part of the revolution and really tried to take down former President Rajoelina and dismantle the system definitely didn't expect there to be a military government that followed. They didn't expect what replaced their old regime was a new military regime. They didn't expect that this would be how things flowed, and now they're left feeling that there may be a chance things just stay the same, or that even worse, Madagascar falls into a pattern that other nations in Africa have fallen into. They have started to cite, the people have started to cite places like Niger, Chad, the Central African Republic, Burkina Faso as nations where once one military takes over and it's violent, just like it was with 2009 when Rajoelina got in power, that it starts a consistent system of violent takeover after violent takeover, and a coup culture is formed, a culture where the only way to change power is a military coup. A violent coup takes place, and the concern of Madagascar's citizens, of the Malagasy people, is that this is what this military will do, and they fear that even with what's happening and the fact that Rajoelina got out of power, what's happening now may lead to even more oppression and a lack of democracy, and without the ease of democracy to carry out. So that is the main concern for the people of Madagascar, but that's not for me to say how it goes. What is likely to happen here is something you'd have to ask a Malagasy politician, someone who has mastered their history. But if you were to ask me, I'd say that it is hard to trust that a military power will just easily relinquish it, considering they showed they could just take it whenever they want. And I think, the current president, I can't say a perfect outlook on him, but my thought is that there was greed involved, that the accusation that comes from many Malagasy people, which states the military jumped in as an opportunity and said, we're bettering the nation by doing this. Us being in power is bettering the nation from Rajoelina and his administration. Many people are saying that that is what they're saying because it's easy. What really happened was, for the sake of bettering the nation, they staged a coup to better their own standing in life and better their control of the country, which I do think is more than likely what's true. But what happens next for Madagascar is anyone's guess, and it is up to the Malagasy people to once again set the path. Because as they have shown with the events of this revolution and the protests before and their ability to rally the troops, the real troops being the citizens, that they can do what they want. If the Malagasy people want something done in Madagascar, be it through pen or protest, they can get it done. So what they need to remember is that this is not the end, no matter how bleak things look from here or how much better they look, to always keep ready to cause change again, because they do have the ability to do it, and they prove that to themselves now, And now with this, they've proven it to the world. So I'm going to leave you with that and leave you to do two things. One, if you're more interested in things with Madagascar, I did make an episode on the history of Madagascar a few years ago that surveyed through the ancient history to early modern, and now contemporary history of Madagascar and how the country got to where it is, different cultural things, facts, the etymology of the name, things like that. And it's something I encourage you to look into if you are interested. The second thing I want you to do is keep your eyes on Madagascar. I don't make these videos to just get a quick click and hope that people, find entertainment. I want it to be a thing you're educated on. I want you to now continue to keep up with a website I like to check, which is World of Freedom and Freedom House, which look into how free it is for a country. See if things are improving in Madagascar and go experience things like this in life for yourself. Continue to stay educated because the world is not just a place of borders and division. It's a place where all of us humans live, and all of us should be in the same fight together against governments like this and against the idea of oppression in and of itself. So I'm going to leave you guys with that. I hope you enjoyed. If you did like it, please subscribe, please come back, because there's going to be a whole lot more content of me yapping into this microphone about history and the world to come, and I hope you're a part of it. So thank you guys, and have a good one.